Hi, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well. This is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour, which is a critical look at Canada's role abroad. A weekly uh, critical take. I'm E. Vingler, abroad. And this is about just a bit over 100 weekly sessions. And yeah, there's a lot of developments in Canadian foreign policy, current, historic this week. So I think I'll get right to it. I should say I'm coming to you from Jojage, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. Um, and first off, Judy Scrow, who's a Liberal MP, had a meeting with Maryam Rajavi, who's the head of the MEK Iranian group that's often described as cultish. They're involved in assassinating people in Iran. And she met Candice Bergen, who is the former conservative MP, was also part of that meeting. And just the continued close ties with these pretty extremist Iranian factions that Canada's been cultivating for many years. And she had Judy Scrow put it on her X or Twitter account. In last week I mentioned a horrible mining disaster where in Turkey, where SSR mining's the leach pad collapsed, and apparently 10 million tons of cyanide laced ore buried 9 mine workers alive. And now I think they're all presumed dead at this point. Also, huge ecological destruction in the valley and into I think, the Euphrates River. And one of the things that's interesting about that is that the Canadian ambassador in Turkey apparently came out right away and denied Turkish media reports that it was a Canadian company. Mining Watch has a post about it, and basically saying that it still has significant ties to Canada. They've modified some part of their Canadian connection, but much of the board, I think the head office may still be in Canada, but maybe now they're on the London Stock Exchange or something like that. I forget the detail. But the Canadian ambassador came out and sort of denied this that was being reported in Turkish media. But in fact, it is still a heavily Canadian company. It was even more of a Canadian company. And Canadian diplomats, Canadian trade commissioners around the world are backing up companies with this or even less connection to Canada. And then now when there's a disaster, they want to say, oh, this has nothing to do with Canada. Fortunately, it appears that the Turkish media didn't go along with this kind of charade of the Canadian ambassador. And apparently they stuck to the idea this was a Canadian company, which is actually correct. A number of the officials of the company were arrested, including one Canadian, for their role in this terrible ecological and even more human disaster. There's this whole, I mentioned this last week in the National Post. They've just continued it all week long with these big, long stories about the Canadian military. It's underfunded. It's a disaster. We have to, everyone's trying to get us, going to be at war in a couple of weeks. We got to put more money into the military. Just total sort of scare stories. I think they published every day since last Saturday. They did a huge front page thing last Saturday. I think that every day in the National Post, or most days at least, have published these stories. Now, it's not just the National Post. The Toronto Star published one piece titled Canada's military is in crisis. Failing to save it will have dire consequences for us all. I think that was the National Post piece. Also, John Ibbotson in the Globe and Mail had this piece, same theme. And what he points out is that he said, yeah, we have to hit the 2% NATO target. That's just and then he says he goes even further. And even more sacrifices may be needed going forward. Increasing defense spending to 3 or 4% of GDP may be required to deter Russia and Europe and China. So he's saying that now this 2% GDP, which would necessitate about $20 billion in increased spending immediately for the military, and even more going forward as Canada's GDP grows, 20 billion immediately, that we have to hit that. And in fact, we should be thinking that actually go for 3% or 4%, which would presumably be another, potentially even another maybe 60, 70 billion a year, which is just completely insane kind of thing. But this is what they're pushing, and the drumbeats of this are growing. And apparently, we have to do this because this is our main threat. Now, the climate crisis, which I think is clearly a bigger security threat to the vast majority, to Canadians, is not viewed in that same kind of a threatening security kind of angle, or the housing crisis is not viewed as in the same kind of security language, or for that matter, lack of drinking water on many reserves, etc. One piece pointed out that the Conservatives have been saying we're going to cut the way we're going to get to increase military to hit this 2%, and they're a little bit vague about whether they'll hit the 2%. But Poilievre is saying we're going to cut this wasteful aid budget. But as is pointed out, that the aid budget's about $6.9 billion a year. So to hit the 20% or to hit the 2% of GDP for NATO, it would take $20 billion. So even if you just cut all of the aid budget, and you would still be far away from the 20 billion. And the aid, I'm not one to get into defending Canadian aid, because I think Canadian aid is very complicated how it plays out, and it's often just a tool of imperialism. But as a general rule, aid is better than military spending. No, that's not complete. There's some aid that really is nasty imperialism, but usually it's better than the military, which is of course the worst arm of the imperial process. The China fear mongering, the Journal de Montréal had what they considered this big expose of this terrible thing, which is that this big security forum in Quebec City, where a bunch of big, like Garda World, the big private security company based in Montreal, they host this kind of sale event for security firms, and that the Chinese company Hikvision was part of it. The title was Tapis Rouge pour une firme bannie, so red carpet for a banned firm. And this company is now recently, this Chinese company that produces like some cameras of some sort, there's been a whole push, which the Journal de Montréal has been part of, pushing it, Quebec government offices to ban this company. I think the US had started this process. And the claim is that these cameras may send information to the Chinese Communist Party. And at a macro level, you could understand that, like maybe some specific federal government offices. I don't think that this is actually happening, that the company's sending in the video to the Chinese Communist Party. But you could at least, to be cautious, not have certain federal government offices. But now they've gone all the way down the ladder. It's like cameras at the Montreal library system, that like we have to start like banning this Chinese technology from the security cameras at like the community center or the public library or any sort of public. It just becomes a joke, right? Like as if the Chinese Communist Party has like some big self-interest in having the footage of like, did somebody bust a window at the public library kind of thing like that. But this is where this whole process goes, right? And this is how this demonization of China, it's this huge threat to us, and the Journal is playing a little role in that. On the foreign interference inquiry, there was the second, as the Globe Mail top of the paper last, I think, Tuesday, headline was "Second Diaspora Group Pulls Out of Foreign Interference Inquiry." And it's the Canadian Friends of Hong Kong that withdrew. And they're withdrawing on the grounds that these individuals, Han Dong and Senator Wu and the third individual, that they've been granted this status that allows them to cross-examine other presenters, so that because they've been demonized, that they have this right to ask questions. It seems completely reasonable to me, but they're framing now this Hong Kong, Canadian Friends of Hong Kong, which I'm not sure, but I'd be astounded if it's not getting National Endowment for Democracy or some other form of U.S. government funding, either directly or one step removed. That they're framing this now as like, this is now Chinese interference. Now the whole inquiry, they're claiming the whole inquiry is now a new form of Chinese interference, because these Han Dong, an MP who was, I believe, very horribly smeared as having made this claim about the two Michaels, two Chinese officials, a totally incoherent claim about, I forget even all the detail, but keeping them in jail. And he was supposedly working with the Chinese officials to keep them in jail. Totally incoherent, nonsensical claim, and he's suing Global News for having made this public attack. But now they're claiming that him being allowed to ask questions of themselves, i.e. the Canadian Friends of Hong Kong, that this will be an example, a tool of Chinese interference into Canada. So now they're trying to make this claim that the whole foreign interference inquiry is going to be used by China as another step in their interference in Canada. I mean, it's comical. Like, really, it's genuinely comical. But this is actually being put out there by serious people. And so in Terry Glavin, in his piece in the National Post, he starts off with this, and he says, quoting the Canadian Friends of Hong Kong representative, "It's not only a show what I'm seeing. What is so alarming is that the inquiry itself is a target for foreign interference. And they're using this foreign interference inquiry as a foreign interference tool. That's why this is so dangerous." I don't even know what you say to people like that. I mean, really? Like, so this whole inquiry into Chinese interference, which is really what it is, demonization of China process. Now this is the Chinese government. This is them pulling the strings. I mean, it's what do you say? In this piece that Glavin has in the National Post, where he starts off with the Canadian Friends of Hong Kong making this crazy claim, then he ends it off with Kaveh Shahrus, who's this Macdonald-Laurier Institute. He's Iranian, a Canadian guy, big part of this anti-Iran kind of milieu. Well, apparently he's running for a conservative to represent the Conservative Party in a Toronto riding, and he's claiming that he hasn't been able to sign up that many people to join the Conservative Party to vote for him in this to represent the riding, and he's basically saying he's asked the Conservative Party to extend the deadline. I guess I don't know all the details. He started late in registering people to become Conservative members to then vote for him in the riding. It's a little bit unclear. But he's complaining that the Conservative Party was unwilling to extend the deadline to register new people. And he's basically saying, he's implying that this whole thing, that the reason he hasn't been able to register enough people, or kind of maybe implying that other people in the riding that are going for the seat, that the Iranian government is interfering, has interfered to like support them. That's kind of what he implies. It's a little bit vague. But he concludes, as this National Post piece concludes, he says, I don't think the conservatives understand this issue, Charu said. We're losing our country, and everybody is just sitting back and letting it happen. The rot is really deep. We're losing our country. So he is now turned him running for a position to represent the Conservative Party, and basically he's losing. He's not going to win the seat, it looks like, and he's presuming other people are better organized for the candidacy. And he's now saying this is an example of Iran interfering in this almost totally irrelevant conservative nomination process. And then he's going a next step, which is almost certainly not true, that Iran's interfering. And then he's going one step further and saying this represents how like our country is being destroyed. I mean, it's just hyperbole along the whole, all along the process. But this is what's coming out in this and in the Conservative Party, who's been all about this interference kind of business to undermine the Liberals, that they're not taking it seriously either. This is where this whole foreign interference thing is going. It's just a total frenzy that's being whipped up. It's all mostly kind of ridiculous. They're making themselves look like real fools. And that Cooper, the former global reporter who's been, he was behind the Han-Dong claims. He's total crazy. It's Chinese interference. And so he's out in the West Coast, I guess, and he's really hyping up. I guess it was this serious assassination, and there's video of this guy shooting like I don't know what it is, like a Uzi, quick rounds, bullets at his car, and it's like this gang assassination attempt. I don't think they actually killed the people in the car, but they seriously injured them. He's saying that this is all like the triads. It's the triad gangsters, it's the Chinese gangsters, and then he said the Iranian gangsters and the Mexican gangsters, and they're influencing the Vancouver gang scene. And I don't doubt that there is elements of truth to that. But like what I keep posting is saying, where do the Hells Angels come from? Right? So it's all about these gangs influencing Canadian criminal scene, but you just won't mention like, what about that, U.S. gangs where like they literally have chapters, right? Like that's just not mentionable. His whole foreign interference, like even at the level of like gangs, it's like unmentionable that U.S. influence within Canadian criminal world, right? So this is kind of where we're at, and a lot of these things. So on Haiti, there's been multiple developments. The Melanie Joly announced $80 million to support the Kenya-led mission to Haiti. And that's on top of 40 million that she had previously announced that goes to the UN to again support that mission. So this is a big contribution. I think the Americans have put up 200 million. So the money, they announce money, and it's often doesn't always come through, and there's questions on that. But nonetheless, as of now, what's been announced, it is a big Canadian contribution to financing this mission. And of course, this mission is controversial in Haiti. It's also very controversial in Kenya because the court has said no, this contravenes Kenyan law. And so Canada and the US are going forward, while it appears that the Kenyan president is going to ignore, a little bit unclear here, but is going to ignore this court ruling restricting his ability to send Kenyan forces to Haiti. And so it's even kind of like undercuts a Kenyan law, it appears. But Canada's going forward with this. The press release announcing it from Joly is just more of the same line. Canada believes in Haitian-led solutions to the political, security, and humanitarian crisis, and remains committed to working with Kenya and other international partners to support a successful deployment of the multinational security support mission and ensure that our efforts are mutually reinforcing. It's all Haitian-led solutions, right? Like we can appoint the leader of the country. We can then fund a East African country to lead a mission that couldn't even get the Caribbean countries to lead. been pressuring all these different countries to lead. Finally, they're able to get Kenya to do this, and we're going to frame it as a Haitian-led solution. I mean, it's just the talking point. These Global Affairs Canada propagandists come up with these talking points, and they just repeat it every single time. Doesn't matter how clearly non-Haitian-led the solution is, Canada will always call it a Haitian-led solution. A story I found on Twitter in Spanish talks about how Canadian troops are already training troops from the Bahamas to join the mission in Haiti. They've showed a photo of Canadians doing that. There's also the CARICOM summit taking place in Guyana. And Canada's International Development Minister, Ahmed Hussein, he's there. He's meeting with the U.S. ambassador to the UN, and both of their statements about their meeting were all about Haiti, and they're obviously pressuring Caribbean countries to support this mission to Haiti. They've been doing this for months now, I guess more than a year, and they're continuing to do that, and they're pretty open and explicit about that. There was a piece in the Globe, a commentary in the Globe, I think on Tuesday, Wednesday, titled "Haiti Elites Should Be Held Accountable for Backing Gangs." And you sort of say, okay, that's fine. You have a certain sympathy for blaming Haitian elites for their role in using gangs, and that's no doubt that they're using it for political reasons, other economic reasons. But it's amazing to read these pieces, and it's just like Canada's role in all this is just completely eliminated, right? Like there's no Canada. We didn't appoint the leader, Ariel Henry, a couple years ago. We didn't, work to appoint Michel Martelly, this former member of the Makut, a serious gang, to become a president a decade or so ago. We didn't overthrow the government in 2004. All this is just eliminated from this, and we are these sort of like the moral arbiter, and we have to like keep these Haitian elite. So this is like sort of a bit more on the kind of, call it like the progressive end. These Haitian elites are backing the gangs, and we gotta it's a little bit more kind of progressive-ish, supposed progressive-ish kind of framing, but it just eliminates Canada. And this is when we talk about putting up $100 million or so for a foreign mission to Haiti, this is happening, on the 20th anniversary of this coup, right? That we're gonna, like, the media is gonna just totally ignore. But it's like 20 years ago, Canadian troops invaded the country to oust thousands of elected officials. Literally, we sent troops to physically put the elected president, U.S. Marines obviously leading a charge, but Canadian Special Forces at the Port-au-Prince, at the Toussaint Louverture airport, securing the airport the night that Aristide was forced on a plane and just like shuttled out of the country and dumped in the Central African Republic. And that was just the culmination of Canada destabilizing this elected government, right? And we destabilized the elected government like before Aristide. This is a crazy piece of imperial propaganda. The destabilization of Aristide began because of an election that he wasn't participating in and had nothing to do with overseeing, right? In May of 2000, there's legislative, mayoral, etc. elections that Aristide's famille Lavalas, he's not the president at that time, Aristide's famille Lavalas wins basically all of it, more than 70% of all the positions, all elected, 7,000 elected positions across the country. They just, huge, big turnout of the elections, right? One of maybe the best election in Haitian history. And it's clear, overwhelming. And the Organization of American States, with Canadian officials all throughout the hierarchy of this mission to Haiti, initially, great election, huge, wonderful democratic display. Then when the results come in and the opposition realizes this, we're not going to be beating famille Lavalas electorally for years, if not decades, because they just won so overwhelmingly. They start claiming there's a fraud, there's dubious, and they hone in on the tabulation, the method of tabulating whether a handful of senatorial seats hit the 50% plus one to avoid a runoff. Okay. And how they were tabulating it, as they had done in previous elections, was it was just the top four candidates' votes. So if you had 50% of the vote, it was based upon the top four candidates, not like all 15 candidates. Sometimes there was all kinds of many candidates down the line, whatever. And so they just kept the votes in the top four, and these 7 of the 8 were Famille Lavalas, got them. One of them wasn't actually Famille Lavalas. And they claimed, and it technically, according to a certain reading of the Haitian Constitution, that was the wrong method to tabulate it. But again, OAS knew it was the method beforehand. It had been done in previous elections. It wouldn't have changed anything. They just would have went to runoff. Famille Lavalas would have won the seats. And they used this to then say the presidential elections, which were taking place in November of that year, that they were tainted. So these elections were tainted, and therefore we're going to boycott the presidential elections, which everyone knew was not a chance in the world, and anyone would come even close to Aristide. He was far and away the most popular politician in Haitian history. Everyone, all the polls, American polls, and then they used that to then cut off money that had already been guaranteed, inter-American development money to the Haitian government. They cut off the funding, cut off the money, $500 million, huge proportion of the Haitian government's budget. And then they used this to start demonizing Jean Chrétien. First international visit Trudeau that Aristide has in April of 2001 at the Summit of the Americas. Chrétien is like, you have to get your democratic in order, Aristide. You're tainted electoral, whatever. And then the whole process goes, and they go and they build the opposition. We fund these opposition groups, fund these groups, NGOs opposing Aristide. Same time, there's these violent former military, Philippe, these thugs coming into the Dominican Republic, killing Famille Lavalas, mayors and officials, killing Aristide supporters. They actually take the National Palace on December 17th, 2001. They capture it. They kill a number of people, capture the palace. They're then driven out. There's this whole destabilization like that taking place. And then we're just a whole time Canada's playing this process. Eventually, there's a growing military threat to the Aristide government, but it wasn't going to succeed. They weren't going to be able to get Port-au-Prince, far and away the biggest city. And then finally, Canadian American troops come in, force Aristide out, and 20 years of a downward spiral. And I should also mention the Ottawa Initiative in Haiti, of course, in late early 2003, where Canada brings U.S., French, OAS officials together, where they basically consolidate the international forces that will perpetrate the coup. And 13 months later, at this meeting, they discuss Aristide's removal, putting Haiti under UN trusteeship, recreating the Haitian military. 13 months later, that all happens. So we are coming on Thursday. It's the 20th anniversary of that very horrible day in Haitian history, and quite frankly, a day that all Canadians should be ashamed of. And we're not going to hear hardly anything about it in the Canadian media. And the core group that has been dominating Haiti for 20 years, that comes out of that whole process. And now we're funding another foreign intervention into Haiti, and not in any way recognizing our role in this downward spiral in the country. And just to end on the Haiti issue, there's going to be a rally on the 29th in Ottawa at noon on Parliament Hill. There's also a event in the evening. I'll be speaking. I'll be there at the rally. Hopefully, I'll get the rideshare early enough to get to Ottawa in the morning for the rally. And then there's also a public event at 7 p.m. at Bronson Center in Ottawa. Anyone who's in Ottawa. On Ukraine, there's many developments on Ukraine. Trudeau, of course, went to Kyiv and said Ukraine must prevail. Newsweek had a headline saying Ukraine can't win the war. So Canada's saying it must prevail, but Newsweek and even the Journal de Montréal had a bunch of people saying that basically Ukraine can't win. So that's starting to get into the media, but not according to our politicians. Trudeau announced a 10-year security deal with Kyiv to shore up the bolster Ukrainian security. He also announced that Canada is going to be giving $3 billion in 2024. Most of its loans, we should note, most of its loans, it seems like a ever greater proportion of the funding announced as loans, which just means, I mean, Ukraine's future. I mean, maybe the money just will never be repaid, but if it is, it's going to be all these conditions, right? And all the leverage that the EU, Canada, the US are going to have demanding everything from Kyiv. And alongside that, Blair, the defense minister, announced Canada sending 800 Sky Ranger R-70 multi-mission unmanned aerial systems, some drones worth $95 million. The New York Times reported, this is also the 10-year anniversary, 2-year anniversary of the Russian invasion, but it's also 10-year anniversary of the coup against Yanukovych. And the New York Times reported that the night after Yanukovych was ousted, the new spy chief that was put in place had met with CIA and MI6 officials to come up with a tripartite agreement. I didn't read this article. I just read the summary on Twitter. It's a New York Times thing. I won't get that. Won't have access to the New York Times until Tuesday at the library. But the apparently they're in the story. They talk about they have a dozen, I think. Basically, the CIA helped completely redo the Ukrainian intelligence apparatus. And they have a whole bunch of stations, I guess, on the Russian border. They were gathering tons of intelligence on Russia, and the story goes through a bunch of these details. And of course, the fact that the night of the coup or just after the coup, you're meeting with the CIA and MI6 is because, of course, the CIA and MI6 were involved in the coup against Yanukovych, which we sort of know at a general level. I think more as time goes on and decades from now, we'll learn ever more detail. Canada, of course, was helped play a role in that coup as well. So that's a little bit more of some of that history of just how involved the U.S. has been in turning Ukraine into a tool of targeting Russia, which is part of the backdrop to the Russian invasion, of course. Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, made a couple comments that I think are notable this week. He said that Kyiv has a right to hit Russia, inside Russia, so can use basically weapons that NATO's given to hit targets inside Russia. He also, again, kind of backdoor confirmed that much of this war was about Ukrainian neutrality, and he said that Putin, quote, started this war because he wanted to close NATO's door. But he has achieved the exact opposite. Ukraine is now closer to NATO than ever before. So they increasingly admit that a central objective of Moscow was to not have Ukraine join NATO and not just join, but had been becoming a part of NATO, even if it wasn't a formal member, through all the training and the intelligence, etc. So they continue to admit this, that effectively that this was in large part about NATO. They'll not admit it because it goes against their unprovoked claims. They won't admit it in that sense, but that's really where they've confirmed that for us. Now, you see on this 2-year anniversary of Russia's invasion, you see really the contrast between how they deal with Ukraine and how they deal with Gaza. And you see that through a lot of the social democratic. So like David Eby, the NDP premier of British Columbia, he posts this 3-part thing to Twitter. He says, 2 years ago, the world watched in horror as Russia launched its unprovoked attack on Ukraine. Since then, Ukrainians have suffered unimaginable losses while demonstrating incredible strength and courage up until this very day. Nothing in the vicinity of that vis-a-vis what is happening to Palestinians, right? Nothing about never use the word horror, certainly not. You never even use the word unimaginable losses. And certainly wouldn't frame Palestinians in this courage and incredible strength. And yet, from the civilians, I mean, the UN says 10,000 civilians have been killed in Ukraine over 2 years. In Gaza, it's something, I think, at least 25,000. Probably it's more than that. And now we're moving towards the famine and ever more dying of starvation, of illness from lack of food, from horrible sanitation conditions. That's happening. It's happening. It's horrible what we're seeing right now. The death, not just from the direct killing, it's undoubtedly, even if it's all stopped tomorrow, I have no doubt we're talking about thousands and thousands of people who are going to have died because of indirect results of what Israel has done in Gaza. And as it goes on, the longer it goes on, those numbers will go up and may certainly well hit tens of thousands. Usually in these wars, the direct killing is only the small proportion, right? So you have 30,000 already confirmed. In fact, it's higher than that when you bring in all those under the rubble still, probably 35 already of direct killed. Usually those dying from indirect results of the warfare is 2, 3, 4 times the number who were killed directly. So that's certainly a possibility here in Gaza. And it's horrible. It's horrible what we're seeing, the continued demonization, this Israeli actor, fairly prominent. She's the wife of the former manager of Chelsea, the football team in the Premier League, and she's on this program, Israeli television program, and it's just a totally startling interview where she refers to Palestinians as vermin and who wear flip-flops, and she talks about the left-wing part of her is gone, and it's actually she's clearly not like, she's not a dumb person. She's like this sophisticated fascism dehumanization that she's expressing in this sort of like liberalish kind of platform in Israel is just totally remarkable. I mean, it's just one of innumerable examples of just the total descent of Israeli society. And this didn't begin October 7th. Certainly, that's the slaughter that they're justifying has led to Israeli society's descent even more. But this is something that's many years in the making. Now, for Canada, there's the call for arms embargo. The UN officials calling for an arms embargo. I think on Sunday or Saturday, they released a whole bunch of prominent UN representatives calling for an arms embargo. They name Canada specifically. One of only 2 or 3 countries, I think, that are named, maybe 4. And they point out that state officials, quote, state officials involved in arms exports may be individually criminally liable for aiding and abetting any war crimes, crimes against humanity, or acts of genocide. So they're making it clear that Melanie Joly, Justin Trudeau, other Canadian officials could be found criminally liable. And of course, Nicaragua brought Canada, bringing Canada to ICJ. I don't fully understand how that process works, but for their Canada, UK, Germany, and Netherlands for their delivery of weapons to Israel, which Canada has increased since October 7th, right? Really increased the arms export permits. The Canada one sort of positive. Canada was stopped, didn't participate, didn't take its oral proceedings at the International Court of Justice on the question of the advisory opinion regarding, quote, the legal consequences arising from policies and practices of Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. So Canada had back 8 months ago, this is not the South African case around genocide in Gaza. This is about the country's legal responsibilities around the not enabling Israel's occupation, so not buying products from illegal settlements in the West Bank, for instance, which the Canada-Israel Free Trade Agreement accepts into Canada duty-free. So it would be around stuff like that. But Canada had said that don't want, the General Assembly called for this opinion from the International Court of Justice, a legal opinion. That's it. It's just a legal opinion. Canada said, voted against the resolution, and then actually submitted a brief saying that they shouldn't even provide an opinion. The ICJ shouldn't even provide this opinion called for by the vast majority of General Assembly members. But they did back away, so they didn't provide oral proceedings to defend. They put out a statement reiterating that was their position, but didn't actually verbalize it, which is a very small victory for the Palestine movement. I think they would have probably done that, except for the increased attention focused on the absolutely outrageous position that they've been taking. There's this TikTok video that's making the rounds of this younger Palestinian Canadian woman talking about her grandma who's 92 and her trying to get her renew her Canadian passport, and that she's blocked from saying where she was born in Palestine. So the passport Canada doesn't accept Palestine as a country or whatever where someone was born. And she goes through this on this in this TikTok video, and it's really just sort of this erasure that Canada's part of, erasing Palestinians. I was going to show, maybe I'll show one of these videos. Let's do this.
Mr. Shine, do you want to apologize to Palestinians for supporting killing of 30,000 Palestinians? Minister Champagne, Minister Champagne, you want to apologize for supporting the killing of 30,000 Palestinians? Minister Champagne, when you were Foreign Affairs Minister, you supported blocking the International Criminal Court investigation of Israel's war crimes. Mr. Champagne, you want to apologize? 30,000 Palestinian children killed. You want to apologize, Minister Champagne? You can answer the question, Minister Champagne. Minister Champagne, don't have to walk away. You can look at me and answer my question. Fine, Minister Champagne. Do you want to apologize to Palestinians?
So that was a couple of days ago, calling out Innovation and Industry Minister Champagne, who was a former Foreign Affairs Minister, on the question of Palestine. It was a very good one. Anna Gainey, the MP here, we had this very good one. I was going to show the video of me asking her, but it was also somebody got inside. I got denied. I got kicked out of the press conference, but I happened to bump into her at the just by chance. As they were kicking me out of the press conference, she walked up the stairs, so I had a quick handful of seconds, and then she just walks away. But there's also somebody who got inside the press conference and had a pretty good challenge to her. I also had this one where at this press conference, the head of the RCMP was there. And as I was biking down to the press conference, in Old Montreal, there was these two big vehicles that just looked like either ministers were in them or like 6 or 7 blocks away from where the press conference was happening. So I followed the two vehicles, and so happened that it was the head of the RCMP who was in one of them, and I got a chance to ask him about why the RCMP is not pursuing Canadians fighting, or groups here inducing Canadians to join the Israeli military under the Foreign Enlistment Act, and more generally about Canadians fighting, possibly being involved in war crimes. That was kind of fun. But so on the question of a few other things on the Palestine question I want to mention. There's a good piece in the Maple Davide Maastricht, where he basically says, looks into whether Canadian journalists could be charged with incitement to genocide for their coverage. And I think he makes a pretty good case. He numbers some examples that a number of journalists who could be potentially pursued. That's worth taking a look at. I also came across this Canadian Jewish News article about this guy named Paul Rinkov, who's the person in charge of like ethnic relations with the Toronto police. And so basically, Palestinians and Muslim individuals, organizations, their engagement with the Toronto police, at least at an ethnic level, is through this guy. He's in charge of the file. This guy went on Birthright. Okay, the Canadian Jewish News article makes it clear that he grew up in a Zionist house. Went on Birthright. That's the pro-Israel trips for North American Jews to go to Israel. Very, racist endeavor. I did a quick search of the guy. He's videoed with the Israeli consul in Toronto in front of an Israeli and Canadian flag. Another one of Israeli flag raising ceremony in Toronto. He's there for. So this is who Palestinians are supposed to. He's in charge of the office where Palestinians are supposed to reach out about like hate crimes or other kind of like ethnic engagement stuff. So, anyways, it's certain if it was a Palestinian that was in charge of the Toronto Police Department, where Jews are supposed to bring accusations of hate crimes, I can guarantee you that would not fly. The National Post had this story about the students at the University of Waterloo. Waterloo students ran UNRWA fundraiser after terror attacks. And I read this piece, and the whole scandal for the National Post is that some dentistry students had a fundraiser for UNRWA. So the scandal is that that students had a fundraiser for a UN agency that the Canadian government has been funding, that for 70 or however many decades, that many countries, and it's just like they frame this as because Israel accused UNRWA of something, therefore anybody, whatever group, it's like, so one individual, I gave a donation, many individuals have give a donation to UNRWA. If someone does that, that's like a scandal. That according to this, and apparently they even got the University of Waterloo even basically got like sort of reprimanded the students for having a fundraiser for a UN agency. It's just absolutely stunning stuff. While a genocide is being perpetrated against those who are benefiting from UNRWA's assistance. The final thing I thought I would just mention quickly is this whole scandal at McGill. So on Thursday, I believe it was, McGill students, Palestine Solidarity students, they shut down the Bronfman building that houses the Disscused Faculty of Management at McGill. And the Faculty of Management has this exchange with the Israeli, I think it's the Hebrew University. I forget that they have the students have the course 433, I think it is called, that has the exchange with the Israeli University. And they were calling for that program to end. And it's part of a broader call for divestment from a number of companies that the McGill board is invested in that are arms companies and stuff working with the Israeli military. And so the Israel lobby, because the Faculty of Management is in the Bronfman building, and I don't know the roots of why it's called the Bronfman building versus the faculty of management with this very Quebecois name. They basically said this building, this occupation was targeting a Jewish philanthropist. That's how, and there's a quote. This is CJA. CJA said anti-Semitism on university campuses, including McGill, has reached alarming levels. This morning, it resulted in a mob blockading the Bronfman building. This isn't about Middle East conflict. It's about targeting institutions perceived to be Jewish. Okay, so they're all very clear about what the demand is with the faculty of management, the Dissot faculty of management, the B'nai B'rith said B'nai B'rith calls on McGill University to give the SPVM Montreal Police permission to intervene. So basically, B'nai B'rith's demanding that the administration, up the ante. They were blocking the doors. I went by there. There was multiple hundreds of people. It was impressive. I got there later in the afternoon. They're basically, I saw them. Some people were allowed in. I don't know how exactly. It was like not a complete shutdown. They didn't have the ability to completely shut down today. I don't know that they necessarily wanted to. I think they were trying to deter classes happening for the day. But basically B'nai B'rith's calling, bring in the police. Let's just, break some heads, whatever, kind of line, which fortunately the McGill administration wasn't so stupid to follow. But that's the fascism we're seeing with the Zionist forces. They're really at the forefront of pushing authoritarian kind of stuff. Now, back to this whole Bronfman anti-Semitism question. Okay, they weren't targeting Bronfman. Okay, but even if they were targeting Bronfman, Bronfmans are like, they're the preeminent Zionist family in Canada. I mean, they ran guns to the Haganah in 47 and 48, right? They were during ethnic cleansing. They set up Birthright. The Edgar Bronfman was the head of the World Jewish Congress for, I think, decades, and it was all about connecting international Jewry to Israel. Stephen Bronfman, I'm not sure what Bronfman the building's named after. Stephen Bronfman is Trudeau's lead fundraiser, and in a 2013 Globe and Mail piece was clear that he was connecting his support, financial support, and mobilizing financial support for Trudeau to Israel. Right? He boasts in that interview that he took Trudeau to Israel, and Harper at that point had never been to Israel, and he was like, Trudeau is more pro-Israel than Harper is. So it's just completely even if they were targeting Bronfman, right? He's this completely legitimate target. This is a series pro-Israel force within Canadian life going back almost a century. Probably a century, because probably back to the 20s, some of the Bronfman, I'm not sure, but certainly 75 plus years. So this is the the demonization. I've targeted both the Bronfmans for things, and one of them actually a McGill event where I asked the Charles, I think it was Charles Bronfman, who was the head of the World Jewish Congress for many years. I asked him if he wanted to apologize to Palestinians. It's actually one of the better interventions I've done. I paused and let him make this kind of uncomfortable pause where he wouldn't answer. And then Stephen Bronfman also, like I said, he's explicitly connects his fundraising of Trudeau to Israel. So these manufactured outrage about anti-Semitism it's just so remarkable. They post, and I should mention that Mark Miller, the immigration minister, and the special the Trudeau government's special representative on anti-Semitism, Deborah Lyons, I think Marco Mendicino, obviously anti-Housefall, they all tweeted out about this alleged act of anti-Jewish bigotry at McGill because of this protest, etc. And I guess to make a final comment is that the protests are continuing this weekend in Montreal. It was probably the second smallest in 21 weeks. It was a bit over 1,000 people. But that was partly because there was a whole bunch of these town halls that took place targeting specific ridings on Sunday. The different Guilbeault, the other minister, out in Hochelaga, focused on their anti-Palestinian, their refusal to oppose the genocide and stuff like that. And I know in other cities, I know they're calling for a national march on Parliament on March 9th. They announced that at the demo on Sunday here. I don't know how big it will be, but I would presume it's going to be many thousands. And I guess I've gone on for way too long here. I'm not sure if Laura's here. I see Yuri, so I'll let Yuri go ahead as I look for Laura.
Hey, can you hear me?
I can.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Eve, as always. And I've been looking a lot at some of your confrontations with with the CTV journalist who didn't want to answer why his outlet is so bad on the Israel and your other confrontations. Honestly, keep doing the great work you're doing. I have 3 very quick questions. One, can you comment on this report that the CBC did of Congolese Canadians protesting Rwanda and Canadian backing of the Rwandan proxy forces in Eastern Congo? Your reflections on the self-immolation of Aaron Bushnell, and one of our contrarian friends here, Stefan, was wondering if you know any right-wing accessible Zoom groups that meet weekly like what you do, because he would like to be an equal opportunity offender and troll them.
I don't know any of those groups. I think that act I watched, I saw a Al Jazeera version of it. I mean, I think that's obviously very heroic what he did. It's also obviously, horrible. Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know what to say about that. Yeah. And then with regards to the Congolese, I didn't see that article. Good on them for protesting, and they should also be highlighting the fact that the Canadian government has really enabled Rwanda in a lot of its devastation in Eastern Congo, which is it's simmering. I mean, I've seen a whole bunch of reports. A couple hundred, multiple hundreds of thousands, I think more, have been driven into Goma, and the M23 is causing total chaos. And I saw a story about the trade routes. So prices of everything in Goma have gone up so much because of the trade routes from Uganda have been blocked. It's not clear. It almost comes across. I'm not following all the details, but it almost comes across as like a sort of like a siege of the city that's taking place. But so yeah, definitely, it's good that Congolese Canadians are protesting.
Go ahead, Laurel. Yeah, you didn't talk about this, the death of Navalny. And I was wondering what you thought Trudeau, or what you think Trudeau gets out of calling Putin weak and cowardly, because he's apparently killed Navalny. When it's come out that Navalny died of a blood clot, and Putin had nothing to do with it, but Trudeau is still pushing this idea that Putin's responsible for the whole thing. And also, Navalny was not anybody to be admired. He was a fascist, and he made some terrible videos about Muslims that were not at all good. What do you think he's up? Do you think he thinks we're stupid?
Yeah,
Trudeau?
I was gonna the Canadian Global Affairs summoned the Russian ambassador, I believe, and the Russians Russians complained about Canada interfering in Russian affairs. Then Navalny is a Russian, and now I think that Navalny was clearly somebody who was, getting American money, any duty. I don't think he was my understanding, he wasn't particularly important opposition figure. He never did very well electorally. And as you point out, he had some pretty unsavory views on a whole bunch of questions. I think that the the state imprisoning people and then people dying is political figures. Even if you don't like a lot of the guy's politics, that's a tricky terrain. And I think that I'm not aware of all the details of the case against him, but it does smell to me of a degree of authoritarianism that should be doubted or questioned or opposed. But I know that the head of the Ukrainian intelligence said that he died of a blood clot, and I'm prepared to believe him. Obviously we know that with Trudeau, it's just all it's just part of the demonization. They very clearly, the Americans using Navalny's death to try to ram through Biden's trying to use that to ram through the big military package to Ukraine that's being opposed by Republicans in Congress, and it's all part of the same kind of thing in with the Canadian government. And any opportunity to demonize Russia is always is taken up. But that doesn't I would say that then doesn't lead to the fact that this guy being in jail, whether that's dubious that he was in jail, even if he was funded, even if he was receiving American money, even if he had very xenophobic views. Yeah.
Okay, Hans, go ahead.
I want to bring it back to Gaza and a report on the CBC National News at 7 a.m. this morning, when I may not have been entirely awake because I couldn't believe my ears what I heard. A quote by Netanyahu that with or without a deal on the release of the hostages, he was going to pursue his ground offensive in Rafah. Did I hear correctly? And my general question to you is, what do you hold of those elements, like, for instance, our left-leaning MPP in Ontario, Kristen Wong-Tam, who are calling for the unilateral release of the hostages, the Israeli hostages, without any release of Palestinian also hostages, and 8,000 uncharged, 8,000 Palestinian prisoners, many without charges pending.
Yeah, I don't support it. I don't. I mean, I most of the hostages that Israel, that Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad have are Israeli soldiers at this point, and they're totally legit. I mean, you can't enforce a military siege on an area for 2 decades and then complain that they captured your soldiers and forced them. I mean, come on. Obviously, that's totally legitimate, and that even minus the whole question of the however many thousands of Palestinians that are being held by the occupation force, and not just how many have been detained. I've seen kind of contradictory numbers, but I think I saw one that was like 7,000 have been detained since October 7th, right? And there were thousands and thousands already detained. So no, that's nonsense. It's not. It's nonsense from a moral standpoint, and it's nonsense from a real politics standpoint. Obviously, Hamas is not going to give up without an exchange one of their central chips they have. And this is like the idea that like Israel's going to stop if they got the hostages back. It's just also total
Mhm.
nonsense. Like yeah, Israel, 2014, 2018, 2009, like, come on, Israel's been terrorizing people in Gaza for a long time. Yes, the hostages give them some excuse, and they so in that sense, I think Hamas early on, that's part of why that exchange happened, is that Hamas wanted to, they're on the shakiest moral ground when it comes to elderly women and stuff like that, which a lot of the hostages early on, a significant proportion were civilians. And so I think that's part of why that exchange happened. Hamas was more, whatever. But obviously Israeli soldiers and stuff. So no, I don't think I think it's all part of. I mean, let's be clear here. This is just like crass Jewish supremacy in our political culture, right? Like a Jewish Israeli life is worth so many times more than a Palestinian. And it's like those who are fixating on the Israelis in Gaza that are detained or held or kidnapped or whatever word you want to use, like, are all human beings human beings? And if you believe that, then this is it's the Israelis in Gaza are absolutely irrelevant to the human tragedy of what's going on here. I understand that Israeli family members, it's not irrelevant to them and their friends and da. But from a macro internationalist humanist perspective, it's irrelevant. How many Palestinian children don't have limbs, for God's sakes? How many of them don't have limbs? Is like 50 times more Palestinian children don't have limbs because of Israel's done than there are Israelis detained by Hamas in Gaza. I mean, it just speaks to an absolute dehumanization and a supremacism of our political culture.
Yeah. Go ahead, John.
Thanks. Couple of points in question. I just find it interesting that from the river to the sea is now an anti-Semitic trope when I think it first appeared in the 1977 Likud charter. Second, I think we need to be clear that agreeing with some criticism of Putin doesn't put us make us allies of the United States, nor should recognizing that Putin and resurgent nationalism in the former Soviet Union does appear to be legitimately popular in the population, so that it is what it is, and we have to deal with it. But my question is just, I'm curious if you've been following the latest moves in the Assange appeal, and if you have any commentary on the current state of the Assange appeal, or more generally on that assault on journalism.
To be honest, I haven't been following it that closely. I know there was, a state, new court stuff, and I know it's sort of the last chance. But because there's sort of limited Canadian connection, I follow it in a very general sense, but I haven't delved into the details.
Eve, I just had a question, which is, I never watch mainstream media, but I'm wondering in Canada, if a person were just watching CBC or CTV, would they get a sense of the magnitude of what's happening in Gaza? Like, are they showing, like, I'm sure they're not showing what Al Jazeera is showing in terms of depth of destruction, but would a person watching mainstream media understand the depth of what's happening there?
Yeah, I watch the CBC, the National, most nights, fairly passively, usually doing something else. I always find that unless you really kind of get into it, I find it really difficult, because as I go into it so much, right? So I just there's this sort of like presumption of what people understand. And I think that's the fundamental thing they don't get. I think, you do hear the number. They will say the number of people that have been killed. That, so in that sense, people are like, whoa, there's 30,000, or the Hamas run, what's the formulation? The Hamas run health ministry says 30,000 have died. So you'll hear that. and that's, I think, fairly startling. The kind of context is left out, and the real deep, and these are stories that I generally don't want to spend too much time watching, because I think, you get the point and then you move on. But the kind of human interest, Al Jazeera will do these stories where they'll like talk to these people who are, searching for like weeds because they can't get any food, and that of course is that, any somewhat humanistic person will be like astounded by that. There'll be little bits of sometimes like my family member in Gaza, and they'll kind of do that kind of human interest kind of story from CBC for Palestinians, but they'll do as many of those for Israelis as they do for Palestinians. So I think that the CBC National, you get a sense of that there's something really bad happening, but it's boxed in with a lot of or a serious lack of context, and then so lack of historic context. But there's also the whole, Canada is kind of like, the very little that would ever kind of really get at, the double, which is that Israel's doing really terrible things and Canada's deeply involved in Israel's really terrible things. That you basically never get. You get a little bit of Israel doing some bad things, but bringing the two pieces together is almost, doesn't happen. I should be fairly quick here, but yeah. So
there are two questions. Do you want to take them, or do you have to?
Yeah, if they can be quick.
Okay, Catherine, can you please? I tried unmuting you, but it's not working. Oh, I think we might be doing something to. Okay, Catherine, can you
there?
unmute? Okay, good.
Okay,
good.
yeah, sorry, I had a little hard time doing that. Yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about CBC because I do listen to it quite a bit, and I like to keep an eye on what they're saying. And sometimes they have like the video of the bombing, and they show the Nasser hospital being invaded, but what they don't show is the mass detention of healthcare workers and the cutting off of the oxygen, the deaths of the prisoners, patients. And of course, I agree with you, Eve, about the context is completely ignored. And this thing about they covered the genocide case of the South African case at the International Court of Justice, but after that, they never put it into the context of what's happening in Gaza is a genocide or plausible genocide or anything like that. And I also just wanted to say something quickly about Navalny, that there was an interesting interview on Democracy Now! A few days ago with Masha Gessen, who talked about Navalny and his nationalistic views early on, and said that he had recanted those and apologized for the videos that he made that were very nationalistic, and he was more of a liberal when he died or when he was imprisoned. So just something to think about.
Okay, thanks. Okay, Anne, do you want to go?
Thank you. Yes. Hello, Eve and everybody. Very quick question. I have been watching quite a bit of the proceedings of the ICJ, and I noticed that Canada was originally scheduled to participate on the 20th. It's in the press release from the ICJ, but they did not participate. And at first I thought it was a good thing, and now I'm thinking, well, this gives them more of an escape if they don't like the ruling of the ICJ. Maybe I just don't know what to make of it, but I just wondered if you did notice it.
It's two completely different things. There's an ICJ case that South Africa brought around genocide in Gaza. What's just happened last couple days has nothing to do with that. It's to do with.
I'm talking about the current one.
Yeah, it's to do with a General Assembly resolution calling for a legal opinion from the court on states and the UN's responsibility vis-a-vis the Israeli occupation. So basically, Israeli occupation is illegal according to international law. And so what are their responsibility to not enable that occupation? And so Canada pushed to oppose the ICJ, even they voted against the General Assembly resolution for the advisory opinion. And then they sent a brief calling on the ICJ to not render that legal opinion that the General Assembly had asked for.
The same as the US and the UK and Hungary.
Yeah, there's like 6 countries, I think, that sent these legal briefs saying that.
Oh, I didn't realize they had submitted anything in writing. I looked for that,
but they bailed on providing a verbal argument, and I think they bailed on that because the issue had become, it was a fairly marginal issue, right? Just Peace Advocates is the one that got the document, the brief that Canada had submitted, and we did an action alert around that, Canadian Foreign Policy Institute and Just Peace Advocates, and I think that was a bit embarrassing, but it was, this was in the summertime. This was before all, there's way more attention devoted to this issue, and so basically, I think they basically pulled out doing that because they didn't. It's a pretty bad look. They put out a statement saying that their opinion was what they wrote in writing, so they didn't back away from what they had done, but they didn't want to be, take it that next step and be identified. But I should just say quickly before ending here, so I'll be doing some events in Toronto on the 26th, in Waterloo on March 27th, in Hamilton on the 28th. If there's anybody in for the new book, Canada's Long Fight Against Democracy, with co-author Owen Schock, if there's anybody who be interested in other events in that area, Guelph, or even in those cities in Toronto in the daytime or stuff like that, get in touch. And if there's anybody, I might go out west. At some point, I'm almost sure we'll go out to the West Coast, Vancouver and Vancouver Island. Get in touch if there's anybody, that stuff. And yeah. Thanks, everyone. Same place. Thanks. Take care.